My aunt questioned my child's DNA, so I exposed her secret. My aunt, the self-appointed matriarch and moral compass of our family, had the audacity to question my son's paternity. She didn't do it in a quiet whisper or a concerned private phone call. No, she did it in front of our entire family, during what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. She planted a seed of doubt she hoped would shatter my marriage. So, I decided she needed a taste of her own medicine. I didn't just want to get even. I wanted to dismantle the pedestal of judgment she had built for herself. In the process of defending my family, I unearthed a 45-year-old secret she had buried so deep, she thought it was long dead. A secret she never ever wanted to see the light of day. Here's exactly how it all went down. And hey, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I tell stories about life, family, and the moments that change everything. If you enjoy what you hear, make sure you subscribe for more stories like this one every day. Alright, let's get into it. Family gatherings in my world have always felt less like a warm hug and more like navigating a field of active landmines. The primary reason for this constant state of anxiety is my Aunt Carol. She's one of those people who seems to subsist entirely on drama and manufactured conflict. Her need to be in everyone's business is insatiable, and she cloaks her meddling in a self-righteous attitude that could curdle milk. For my entire 30 years on this planet, she has been the queen of our family's purity, casting judgment from behind her bifocals on every life choice anyone dared to make. She's judged careers, spouses, parenting styles, and even home decor. Her signature move is to deliver a soul-crushing insult with a serene, almost beatific smile, making you question if you're the crazy one for being offended. I learned early on that the safest strategy was to just steer clear of her orbit. I'm 30 years old and my husband Mark and I have been happily married for 5 years. We have a beautiful, energetic 2-year-old son named Leo. To say Leo is the center of our universe would be an understatement. He's this perfect little blend of chaos and joy. But physically he doesn't look like a carbon copy of either of us. He has my green eyes, that much is clear, but his hair is a sandy brown, almost blonde in the summer sun. It doesn't quite match my dark brown curls or Mark's jet black hair. It's just a normal, beautiful quirk of the genetic lottery. Our pediatrician laughed about it during his 1-year checkup, telling us stories about recessive genes and how his own red-headed child came from 2 brunettes. It was a non-issue for everyone except, of course, Aunt Carol. To her, it was a scandalous mystery that she was personally tasked with solving. From the day Leo was born, her campaign began. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. At his christening, she cornered my mother and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Oh, where did that hair color come from?" delivered with her trademark sickly sweet smile. When we'd post photos of him online, she'd comment, "It's so funny who kids end up looking like, isn't it? A real mystery." Every comment was a tiny poison dart aimed not just at me, but at the legitimacy of my family. Mark, bless his endlessly patient soul, would just smile and say something diplomatic like, "Yep, genetics are a funny thing," or "He's his own little man." But I could see it was getting under his skin just as it was getting under mine. I'd find him looking at old family photos, searching for some long-lost blonde ancestor. My own mom, a professional peacekeeper, advised me to just ignore her. "That's just Carol being Carol," she'd say with a sigh. But you can only ignore a persistent poison for so long before you start to feel sick. Her daughter, my cousin Clara, is a completely different story. She's gentle, kind, maybe a little naive, and she spent her entire life trapped under her mother's suffocating thumb. We were inseparable as kids, building forts and sharing secrets. But as we grew up, her mother's constant meddling and criticism of my life choices, my college major, my decision to move in with Mark before we were married, erected a wall between us. Clara always seemed to be walking on eggshells, constantly apologizing for her mom's behavior with this permanent look of exhaustion etched on her face. I felt deeply for her, but I also had to keep my distance. I simply didn't have the energy to get tangled in Aunt Carol's suffocating web. The breaking point, the moment the Cold War turned hot, finally came at my grandparents' 50th anniversary party. The entire extended family was there. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, great-uncles, everybody. The atmosphere was genuinely happy. We were celebrating a half-century of a quiet, loving marriage. The kind of love story that feels rare and precious. But Aunt Carol, never one to let a happy moment simply exist, saw the gathering as her personal stage. We were all in the backyard of my grandparents' home, the place where we'd had countless birthdays and summer barbecues. The lawn was green, the string lights were twinkling, and my grandmother was beaming as she and my grandfather prepared to cut a massive multi-tiered cake. Leo was toddling around on the grass, chasing a butterfly and being his adorable, clumsy self. He tripped and fell as toddlers do and let out a little cry. Without a second's hesitation, Mark scooped him up, brushed the grass off his little overalls and kissed his forehead, murmuring reassurances. It was a beautiful, tender moment between a father and his son. And that's when Aunt Carol, who had been watching like a hawk, decided to make her move. There was a lull in the conversation as my grandfather raised his knife to the cake. In that moment of relative silence, Aunt Carol spoke, her voice carrying with perfect, chilling clarity across the patio. You know, Danielle, she always used my full name to sound formal and condescending. It's just so important to protect the family line. To know where we come from. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Then she looked from me to Mark, who was still holding Leo close. With that hair color, have you two ever thought about a paternity test? Just for peace of mind, you know. To make sure everything is as it should be. The air just sucked out of the backyard. It was a physical sensation. My mom's jaw dropped, a small gasp escaping her lips. My dad, who is usually the calmest man in the world, went rigid, his face turning a dark shade of red. He looked like he wanted to physically throw her out of his parents' house. Mark just froze, his face a total mask of disbelief and rage. He looked at me, his eyes wide, then down at Leo in his arms, then back at my aunt. I could see the hurt wash over him, the complete and utter humiliation of having his fatherhood questioned so publicly, so cruelly. I felt this white-hot fury build up in my chest, a fire that burned away all my previous strategies of avoidance and tolerance. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't one of her harmless little digs. This was a direct, calculated attack on my family, on my marriage, and on my husband as a father. She had finally crossed a line from which there was no return. She tried to wrap her venom in a pretty bow of family concern, but we all knew what it was. A declaration of war. That night, after a tearful, silent, and incredibly angry car ride home, I knew I couldn't just let this go. An apology wouldn't fix it. A confrontation would just be more drama for her to feed on. No, this required something else entirely. This required a lesson. The days following the party were thick with a tense, miserable silence. Mark was quiet, withdrawn. He kept insisting he was fine, that he didn't care what my aunt thought, but his actions spoke louder. He was a man deeply wounded. I'd find him late at night, just staring at Leo while he slept, and I could see the flicker of that toxic doubt my aunt had so callously planted in his mind. It made me physically sick to my stomach. Mark loves that little boy more than life itself, and she had tainted that pure love with her poison. My mother called me twice, begging me to be the bigger person, and let it go for the sake of family peace. But what peace was she talking about? The peace of letting a bully walk all over the people you love? The peace of smiling while your husband is being emotionally gutted? No thanks. I stewed on it for about a week, my anger simmering like a low-grade fever. I went through a whole Rolodex of petty revenge fantasies. I thought about airing her dirty laundry on social media, or accidentally spilling a glass of red wine on her pristine white sofa at the next family dinner. But none of it felt right. It had to be poetic. It had to be a direct and proportional response. She used the sanctity of DNA and lineage to attack my family, so I was going to use the hard science of DNA to expose the truth about hers. That's when a long-forgotten piece of family gossip floated back into my mind. I was a teenager, and my grandmother, after maybe one too many glasses of sherry at Christmas, had let it slip that Aunt Carol was quite the wild child before she married Uncle Robert. Apparently, she'd had a passionate whirlwind romance with some blue-collar guy her parents, my great-grandparents, absolutely despised. The story was that they forced her to break it off. It was all hushed up very quickly when my grandfather overheard and gave my grandmother a stern look. The topic was never mentioned again. At the time, it was just a juicy tidbit of ancient history. But now it was a breadcrumb. A breadcrumb leading me down a very interesting path. And as if by fate, Clara's 46th birthday was just a few weeks away. Clara, who had always been fascinated by our family history, who was always asking my grandmother for old stories. The plan began to form in my head, so simple in its execution, but so potentially devastating in its impact. I went online and spent an hour researching. I didn't want a cheap, generic test. I wanted the best. I ordered one of those top-of-the-line DNA test kits, the kind that gives you a full, detailed breakdown of your ancestry and, more importantly, connects you with biological relatives in its database. When the kit arrived, I wrapped it beautifully in gold paper and tied a big, elegant silver bow on top. I wrote a card filled with sweet, genuine sentiments about how much I loved her and how I thought this would be a fun, meaningful way for her to explore the family roots she was so curious about. It was the perfect Trojan horse, a gift of love and connection that concealed an instrument of war. I was about to give my aunt exactly what she claimed to care so much about. The unvarnished biological truth of your lineage. That I gave it to Clara at a quiet birthday lunch, just the two of us. Her reaction was even better than I'd hoped. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, this is awesome, Danny," she said, hugging the box to her chest. "I've always wanted to do one of these. Mom is always going on and on about our proud heritage. She'll get such a kick out of seeing the results." I just smiled, a calm, steady smile that betrayed none of the turmoil in my chest. I thought so, I said. You'll have to let me know if you find any surprises. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The trap was set. The bait was taken. All I had to do now was wait. The wait was pure, unadulterated agony. For 6 long weeks, there was nothing but a deafening silence. Life just went on, but with a new, tense undercurrent. Mark and I had a long, difficult conversation one night after Leo was asleep. He held my hands and looked me in the eyes, reassuring me that he knew Leo was his son, that he loved us both, and that my aunt was a miserable human being. But that shadow she had cast was still there, lingering in the corners of our home. The what if she had put out into the universe had left a stain. Then one Tuesday afternoon as I was unloading groceries, my phone rang. It was Clara. Her name flashed on the screen and my stomach plummeted. I answered and was met not with a greeting but with a choked, gasping sob. "Can you come over?" she cried, her voice thin and ragged. "Something's wrong. Something is really, really wrong with my DNA test." I was at her house in 20 minutes, my mind racing the entire drive. I found her at her kitchen table, her laptop open, her face pale and blotchy from hours of crying. Across the room, her mother, Aunt Carol, was standing by the counter, gripping the marble edge so hard her knuckles were bone white. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. The silence in that pristine, perfectly decorated kitchen was terrifying. It was heavy and absolute. "What is it, Clara?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper even though I felt like I already knew. Clara couldn't speak. She just pointed a shaky finger at the laptop screen. I walked over and looked. It was her DNA results dashboard. I scrolled past the pie charts of ancestry percentages, Irish, German, English, all the things Carol had always boasted about. I kept scrolling until I reached the section labeled DNA Relatives. And there was. At the very top of the list, under the heading Father, was the name of a man I had never heard of. It was not Uncle Robert, the man who had raised her for 45 years, the man she had mourned a decade ago. He wasn't her father. "It's a mistake," Aunt Carol said, her voice high-pitched and shrill. "A lab error. Those tests are wrong all the time, everyone knows that." "Is it, Mom?" Clara's voice was like ice, filled with a venomous calm I had never ever heard from my gentle cousin. "Because I already looked it up. The chance of a paternal mismatch error is less than 1%. And then I did something else. I called him. I called the man on the screen." She turned to face her mother fully. "He lives 2 towns over. He has a family. And he remembers you, Mom. He told me everything. He said you broke his heart. He said you told him you were marrying someone else and never to contact you again." Aunt Carol just crumpled. It wasn't a slow, graceful descent. It was all at once, like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut. She slid down the kitchen cabinets to the floor, buried her face in her hands, and let out this horrible, guttural sob that seemed to be torn from the deepest part of her soul. The whole story came pouring out between gasps and heaving tears. The passionate affair with the man her parents disapproved of, right before her wedding. She was in love with him but chose the stability and social standing that Uncle Robert offered. She broke it off, got married in a lavish ceremony, and then a few weeks later found out she was pregnant. For 45 years she had built a fortress of denial, convincing herself and everyone else that the baby was Robert's. She never told a single soul, not even her own husband. Clara just stood there watching her mother completely fall apart, with her own tears streaming silently down her face. "My whole life is a lie," she whispered, her gaze shifting to meet mine. The accusation and devastation in her eyes were like a physical wound. "My father, the man whose eulogy I gave, the man I mourned for a decade, he wasn't my father." She had just lost her dad all over again, right there in the middle of her mother's perfect, sun-drenched kitchen. And I just stood there, a silent observer to the fallout of the bomb I had so carefully and deliberately planted. I wanted revenge. I wanted to teach my aunt a lesson about throwing stones in glass houses. But I don't think I ever truly understood the size of the blast radius. In my quest for justice for my family, I had shattered the entire foundation of another. In the immediate aftermath, our family didn't just crack. It fractured into a dozen warring pieces. Clara, understandably, cut off all contact with her mother. She moved out of the house they had shared since her father's passing and told my mother she couldn't even look at the woman who had built her entire existence on such a monumental, selfish lie. The shock and betrayal were just too deep. My aunt, who is now just a shell of her former formidable self, calls it her punishment, a word she whispers to anyone who will still listen. The news ripped through the family like wildfire. It created clear battle lines. Some relatives, like my mother's brother, called me cruel and vindictive, saying I destroyed a family out of petty spite. And if I'm being honest, there are moments I believe they aren't entirely. Wrong. My methods were brutal. But others, the cousins and aunts who had been on the receiving end of Aunt Carol's judgment for years, saw it as a brutal but necessary dose of karma. One cousin texted me, she spent a lifetime digging for dirt on everyone else. It was only a matter of time before she hit a grave in her own backyard. My relationship with my aunt is obviously non-existent. We do not speak. On the rare occasion we are forced to be in the same room, like at my grandfather's funeral last year, she won't even look in my direction. The arrogant, judgmental matriarch who held court at every family function is gone, replaced by this broken, lonely old woman who seems to shrink with every passing day. My relationship with Clara is strained, but we are slowly, cautiously trying to rebuild. She told me through tears that she doesn't blame me. She blames her mother. But the DNA kit I gave her will always be the weapon that blew up her world, and we both know it. Healing for her and for us is going to take a very, very long time. As for me, Mark, and Leo, that dark cloud my aunt tried to place over our little family is gone. In a weird, twisted way, the exposure of her secret made our own family unit stronger, more resilient. It was a stark and brutal reminder of what truly matters. Nobody dares to question us now. Nobody makes snide comments about Leo's hair. The hypocrisy was just too glaring, the lesson too severe. I am not going to sit here and pretend I'm the hero of this story. My revenge was cold, calculated, and it caused an immeasurable amount of pain. But even with all the fallout, I don't regret it. My aunt didn't just insult me. She came for my child, my husband, and the sanctity of my home. She tried to poison the most precious thing in my life. And she learned the hardest way imaginable, that if you are going to spend your life pointing fingers and questioning the integrity of others, you had better be damn sure your own hands are clean. So what do you guys think? Was I justified in my actions, or did I go way too far? What would you have done in my position? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm really curious to hear different perspectives on this one. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Like and share. Thanks for listening.